to my animal rag quilt tutorial. In this tutorial, you are going to learn how to sew both the puppy dog as well as the kitty cat. Now, this is a pattern that I have written up myself. I am super proud of it. It has taken me months and months to perfect. I will have the pattern linked in the description down below, and let me show you a little bit of what you will be getting. So if you check out the pattern, then you will actually be getting two separate downloads. The first download will be all of the instructions, and the other download is going to be the actual pattern pieces themselves. Now, I have a whole separate tutorial that's going to walk you through how to actually piece all of those pattern pieces together. It is actually really easy to do. However, I still want to be able to show you how to do it. Once you see it, you will understand the concept and you will be on a roll. So this is what the pattern pieces will look like once you've created them. I'm super proud of how they turned out. I have added grain line arrows for you. I have added all of your seam allowances so you're not cutting out extra paper for your seam allowances. And I have reused these pattern pieces at least 6 times and they are still going strong. So definitely check out the link in the description down below for the pattern as well as for the tutorial on how to make your own pattern. Now, I want to show you exactly what you're getting yourself into. We've got ourselves an adorable kitty cat, and I do have another one to show you. Give me a minute. Here we are. Isn't it adorable? So this is the kitty cat animal rag quilt. It has adorable little paws and cutesy little feet. And I love that it has whiskers, but I don't know if you can notice it's missing something. What is it missing? It's missing its mouth. And I did that on purpose because I don't know if you've seen, but there is a Japanese word that I can never remember what it is, so I will put it on screen here, and it essentially means cute. And all of my stuffies that my boys have slowly been bringing in to our home over the years seem to go along that theme. And I've noticed something about all of those adorably cute stuffies. They don't have mouths. So I decided, instead of a mouth, to give my kitty cat an adorable heart nose. So that's the kitty cat. I am going to be covered in fluff by the end of this tutorial. I probably should not have worn a dark shirt. All right, we've got ourselves an adorable puppy dog animal rag quilt. Now, I did give this puppy dog a mouth, and that's because he didn't have whiskers to kind of clearly define who he was. Yes, he's got adorable puppy dog ears. However, I was told by some family members it looked like a bunny, so I felt the need to add a little mouth on this one. And I think that it still has that cute factor. What do you think? It also has the adorable little paws. Let's see if I can find it here. It's got the adorable little paws and, of course, the cutesy feet. So I'm really, really happy with how these rag quilts turned out. Let's jump on into the tutorial. However, this video is going to be a long one, even though I am cutting things quite short. So if there are particular steps that you want to get to immediately, I am going to have timestamps in the description down below. You can go right to that spot in the video itself. So I hope that you will check out my pattern in the description down below. And now let's get sewing. The first thing you'll do is grab all of the pattern pieces that you have previously cut out. Then go to page 3 of my pattern instructions, and that is the cutting instructions page. I will have 2 layouts shown there, one for the cat and one for the dog. Follow the layout of the rag quilt animal pattern that you are choosing to do. There are a few things that I do want to point out that I think are very important to know. When I am cutting out all of my fabric, all of my flannel is folded in half. That's how it comes off the bolt from the store, and I keep it that way for 2 reasons.
The first is when you are cutting the actual animal rag quilt head. This pattern piece is only a half oval because it is meant to lay up along the folded edge of your flannel. That way, once you've cut out the half oval, you will end up with a full oval. The other reason why you keep your flannel folded in half is because all of the other pattern pieces require sets, and sets need to mirror each other. There will also be a line with arrows on each pattern piece, and that shows you how to lay your pattern piece. That way it follows the grain line of the fabric. And when I am cutting out my pattern pieces, I make sure to pin them securely onto my fabric so that they're not shifting around. And then I will use a combination of my fabric scissors and my rotary cutter to cut out all of the pieces. Once all of your pattern pieces are cut out, the next step is to actually layer all of these pieces together in a sandwich format. I explain this on page 5 of my pattern instructions. What you'll do is you will take the fabric that you chose for the center of your rag quilt. So for myself, that's my white flannel. And you will lay it in between your sandwiched sets. So for the head, you will unpin it so that you get your big oval. You will lay the head so that the pattern of the fabric or the color of the fabric is face down. Then lay your layer of your white flannel on top of that. Then, right side face up, lay your final oval face down on top of that. And then you can just put that aside and carry on sandwiching all the rest of your pieces. There will be a few pieces that might not need any sandwiched layers. For the most part, those belong on the face of your animal rag quilt, and I make it very specific in the pattern instructions which ones will not need that third sandwiched layer. Before we start piecing our animal rag quilt together, you will need to remove your regular sewing foot from your sewing machine if you have a walking foot. Now, you can sew this pattern without a walking foot, but I highly recommend, if you can afford it, to get yourself a walking foot. They are not that expensive. I will have them linked in the description down below, and they are very easy to attach to your sewing machine. So you will remove your sewing foot from your sewing machine, but then you will also remove that little back piece that holds your sewing foot on there. Then you will take your walking foot, and it has these little teeth that will wrap around the bar of your sewing machine, but then it also has this arm that goes up and down. And you want to make sure that that arm connects over the rod that sticks out to the right of the center post of your sewing machine. I hope this is making sense. Obviously, watch the footage because it's a lot more clear when you're seeing it. And then you can just tighten it right on there. Now, what it's going to do is it's going to push the fabric through from the top side of your fabric, as well as what the feed dogs are doing on the underside of your fabric. So it will pull all 6 layers of fabric that you will be sewing together at a more even rate, so your fabric won't start shifting.
Sorry to interrupt this video, but I realized I never introduced myself. I am Tamara from Tamara's Joy Sewing. This YouTube channel is all about beginner sewing projects, and I truly believe that this animal rag quilt is a beginner project. I have been making them for years, and I promise you they were one of the first things I learned to sew. So if you're loving this video tutorial, please hit that subscribe button, hit that thumbs up button so that YouTube knows to share this video with others, and let's get back to sewing.
Now let's start piecing the main body of the rag quilt. The main body is the same for the cat and the dog. Pay attention to where fabric A and fabric B are, because that will matter for the cat rag quilt. Definitely check out the pattern instructions to be able to see all of the specifics, but here I'm just going to show you the generic way that I lay out the main body fabric panels. So here you can see I've created the checkered pattern. Both of the fabrics are 3 layers thick. And then I pinch the center so that both seams end up face up. And then I can lay the backs of the fabrics together, pinning across that top edge. And then I know that my ragged edge will end up on the top of my pattern. And as I move down to the next 2 pieces, you can see here, I am making sure that I am connecting the left 2 pieces together and then the right 2 pieces together. This makes sewing the feet onto your animal rag quilt much easier. If you were to sew the 2 feet together first and then try to attach them to the 2 panels above it, it will make for a much harder seam to sew. So make sure that you are following the pattern instructions order. And we will be sewing 1/2 inch seam allowances along all of these seams. Now I like to use this sewing gauge here to help me figure out where a 1/2 inch seam allowance might line up on my sewing machine, and then I will follow that as my guide moving forward. Now, as you can see here, we are sewing through 6 layers of flannel, which is why that walking foot is very helpful. You will still let your sewing machine do the work, so it will be pulling things through on its own. You are just guiding the fabric on through. Sometimes I find it helpful to hold it a little bit on the back, and then when I start seeing fabric moving around at all, I will hold my hand onto the fabric in front of it, just keeping it a little bit taut. That way I'm not sewing over any bubbles. And then start and stop with a little back stitch, and then you can carry on to your next set. So here you can see we have pieced together the first 4 sections, and now you want to piece together the left sections together and the right sections together. So you'll do the same method. You will pinch those 2 seams that you've laid above and below each other. You'll just pinch those 2 pieces of fabric together. That way you're making sure that your seam is once again ending up on that top edge. You will sew that with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and then you will end up with a left and a right side to your main body panel. You can see all of this in page 7 of my pattern instructions. And now that you have created the left side and the right side besides the little arms, you now want to connect those 2 main body panels together. To do this, you want to finger press open those seams, lay the panels so that both back sides are face together, and then you can clip along that top edge, making sure that all of those seams are open. Then take it to your sewing machine, sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance along that entire edge, starting and stopping with a back stitch. And then it's time to add our little arms to the body. Now we have to prep the little arms first. So as you can see, I'm just snipping little 1/4 inch snips along the inside of both of these arms. It gives it the flexibility it needs to sew on a curve. Then take it to your sewing machine and sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around that outer curve. And now it is time to attach those adorable little arms to the main body panel. So measure 4 inches down from the top edge, and then you can line up your arm right along that 4 inch edge. Make sure, of course, that the arm is laying at the correct angle. There is a right and a wrong angle to the arms, so you want to make sure that they are both going to end up laying in the same way. You can refer to your pattern piece to make sure that the angle is correct. Then throw 1 clip in it so that it stays in the correct spot before turning it over so that you can work along the back side of the main body. I find it easier to line up the edge of the arm with the body working from the back side. Clip it all in place. At this point, if you want, you can sew a basting stitch along that arm just to hold it in place. I do skip that step and I just continue clipping around the entire body, making sure that all of those extra seams are clipped open. Then you will sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around the entire outer edge of the body except for that neck opening. This seam will naturally attach those arms in place beautifully. This is a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and you will start and stop with a backstitch. And here you can see how that looks when that final seam is sewn. And now we can move on to the head of our rag quilt.
Okay, so it is at this point in the video we are going to be dividing and conquering, let's just say. So first I am going to walk you through everything that you need to know to be able to piece the cat face together. But there are a few things that are the same from the cat face to the puppy dog face. So I show those to you first. I'll show you how to do the eyes, and I'm going to show you how to prep the whole head. And those two things I'm not going to repeat in the puppy dog face. So definitely check out the cat face, even if you're doing the puppy dog face, just to get an idea of how to do the face and the eyes. And then we can move on to the dog face once the cat face is done.
So grab all of the face pieces for your cat, as well as the ear pieces and your large oval pieces for the actual head. Let's work on prepping all of our pieces. For the eyes, you don't actually have sandwiched pieces, but you have 2 layers of the white and then 2 layers of the black or dark gray, whatever you chose. And then you will line them up along the bottom, and you will measure a 1/4 inch up from the bottom of the larger eye piece, and then you can pin the smaller one in place, that 1/4 inch up. You'll do that for both of the eyes, and then of course you'll take that to your sewing machine and you will sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around that inner eye section, starting and stopping with a backstitch, of course. Next, you need to prep your cat ears. So for your cat ears, you'll have 2 pieces that are cut out. So you'll have an inner ear piece, which will not have a sandwiched section. And then you'll have your outer ear piece, which does have a sandwiched section in between. You will lay the inner piece inside the outer piece. And once again, make sure you're making mirrored images of each other. So check your paper pattern piece and make sure that your cat ears are laying the way that you need them to lay. Make sure, of course, that the correct fabrics are on the right versus the left. Then pin the inner cat ears onto the outer cat ears. Just center them in place. And of course, to finish prepping them, you will bring them to your sewing machine. You will sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around the outer edge, and then you can choose a 1/2 inch or 1/4 inch. My pattern says to do a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the inner ear section. Now, this is what your cat ears will look like once prepped. Now, you can see that I actually did sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around those inner cat ear sections. That was a mistake that I did not notice until I was editing this video. So you can sew a 1/4 inch or a 1/2 inch. It's totally up to you. I do like the 1/4 inch seam allowance for the sections that don't have a sandwiched piece in between. But once again, this mess up is not a big deal. Now that we've prepped those pieces, we will move on to the actual face of the cat. So grab the large oval sandwiched piece that you've created. So that's those 3 layers. And we need to sew a plus sign into this large oval. For the center line going vertical, I just follow the fold crease from the fabric because obviously it was folded in half when we cut our pattern. So I like to use a chalk marker for this. You can also use a water-soluble marking pen. Then put some pins on either side of that line, roll up the sides towards the center, take it to your sewing machine, and sew a seam down that center fold. Next, it's time to mark a horizontal line. So the way that I do this is I will fold it in half. I will take my long ruler and run it along the center of that fold. That allows me to get rid of any wrinkles that may have shown up from the fabric itself. Then I'll open it up and draw another line down the ruler's edge. I'll place pins on either side of that marked line before taking it to the sewing machine and sewing another seam down that marked line, creating our final plus seam onto the face. Now it's time to add that eye patch. So line the outer edge of the eye patch with the curve of the face itself. I like to try to line up the right side of the eye patch close with that center vertical seam line. Then pin it in place and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the outer edge of the eye patch. Now, don't get too stressed out about exactly where these facial features end up. I'm sure that you can eyeball them and you will be quite happy with where they line up. But in my pattern, I do give you measurements for where you can place them if you want them to be exact. You will find all of those measurements starting on page 10 in the pattern instructions. Now, I do recommend that you take it to your sewing machine right now and you sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the outer edge of both eyes. It's nice to do these pieces individually. That way you're not dealing with so many pins when you're at the sewing machine. However, for the tutorial itself, I did not do that, so I attached everything and then I had to deal with all of the pins at my sewing machine. Take the face to your sewing machine and sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around all of these facial features. Now go slow. As you can see here, I've got my hands pushing down on the fabric. I'm slowly guiding the fabric and turning it around, but I'm not tugging on the fabric. I'm just pressing down to try to help the fabric stay flat and not get bumps within the layers. Don't forget to trim away the few little threads that are on the back side of your face. And then it's time to add the whiskers. So the whiskers we've cut out also in sets of 2. So as I'm pulling out the 6 whiskers needed, there's actually 12 pieces there because they are doubled up. Then start by laying the center whisker an inch away from the cheek. Then you can pin the rest in place, just kind of eyeballing where they sit nicely. You will sew a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the entire thing and start and stop with a backstitch. Now moving on to page 11, we are finally going to add those cat ears. So prep those cat ears the same way that you did those arms, cutting 1/4 inch snips along that inner edge. And now it's time to attach the ears exactly where you want them. So I like to start with the front of the cat face up. I'll measure from that center seam out 4 inches. I'll pin those ears in place, then I'll flip it over to continue pinning those ears. And then you can slowly curve those ears along the curve of the face and clip them in place. Now it's at this point that you can baste those ears in place the same way I suggested you could do with the little arms of the body, or you can skip the basting and you can sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance around almost the entire edge of the face itself. So I'll start along the bottom section of the cat face, not all the way to the bottom because I know that that will get attached to the main body, but close. Start with a back stitch, sew all the way around, obviously attaching those ears in place, and then stopping close to the bottom of the face structure once again, ending with a back stitch.
Now it's time for the dog face. Like I said before, definitely check out the eyes and how to actually piece the large portion of the face together in the cat tutorial portion. Hopefully that made sense.
Now let's prep the dog face. So you can move to page 12 in the pattern instructions, and I'm just going to show you here how to prep the dog ears first. So they will need to be sandwiched, of course, with a 3rd layer, and then you will sew around that outer edge at a 1/2 inch seam allowance. Now you don't have to go across that top curved edge because that will get sewn later on. Make sure, of course, that everything is clipped around that outer edge. That way, when you're sewing around it, the fabric is not shifting. Now that the dog ears have been prepped, just go ahead and prep the eyes and the face the same way that I showed you when I showed you how to do the cat face. Then, once you have prepped the head with that plus seam onto it, we can start adding the facial features of the dog. Now, the measurements for the dog facial features are different than the cat, and that's because those dog ears will cover a lot of the face. So follow the measurements in the pattern and then lay the ears on top to make sure you like where the face features are laying underneath those ears. So for the eyes, you will place them 2 inches from the vertical sewn line and then just touching the horizontal line. Pin them in place, and for all facial features, you are sewing a 1/4 inch seam allowance around the outer edges. Then, moving on to the nose, you are going to lay it 3 inches below the horizontal line. Don't pin too many pins because we just temporarily need it there so that we can slide the dog's mouth 1 inch underneath the nose. Pin that mouth in place and then remove the nose. Take it to your sewing machine and attach the dog's mouth with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Do this very slowly. Then, once the mouth is attached, you can add that nose right back and sew it in place. Finally, adding the cheeks, and the cheeks will be 1 inch from the edge of the heart nose and a 1/2 inch below that horizontal line. Again, go slow when you are adding all of these facial features and use that 1/4 inch seam allowance. Then it's time to add the ears. Now measure from that center seam out 7 inches, and that is where the dog ears should lay. And then of course line them up along that outer curve, clip it in place, and then fold and pin the puppy dog ears up and out of the way a little bit before sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance starting at the bottom of the dog head up and around, attaching those puppy dog ears and then stopping close to the bottom of the puppy dog.
And now it is time to attach the cat head or the puppy dog head to the main body. Let's jump on in to that part of the tutorial.
So just the same way that you snipped along the inner curve of the arms and of the cat ears, you'll want to snip 1/4 inch little slits into the neck of the main body. And then you'll attach the cat head, so the back of the cat head, to the back of the main body, and you'll just line up those center seams. And once that face is centered, then I find it easier to flip it on over so that I can slowly guide the neck of the main body, which is where you added those slits, along the curve of the cat. Now, I don't know if you can tell, but you can see some white sticking out past my cat's face. Now that is the center sandwiched layer, and it just ended up being cut just a little bit bigger than the rest of the face. So I'm ignoring that line and I'm lining up the actual outer fabric edges together. And then you'll take this to your sewing machine and you will sew a 1/2 inch seam allowance across that edge, sewing the face and the body together. And now that the heads are attached to the bodies, this is what your puppy dog will look like fully attached. And this is what the kitty cat will look like fully attached.
So we have sewn all of our pieces together, and now it's time for the hard part. It is time for all of that snipping. Before I actually show you how you should snip this project, I want to show you this pair of scissors here. It's spring-loaded. It is the best pair of scissors I have ever used on a rag quilt. And believe me, I have sewn a ton. I've sewn an animal rag quilt for each and every one of my nieces and nephews, and there are a lot of them. So definitely check this out if you want to like save your hand. You don't need this, but if you want to make the process easier, highly recommend. It is linked in the description down below, along with that walking foot that I talked to you about earlier. So let's get to snipping.
And now it's time to finally snip all of those raw edges. And I like to work especially on the facial features on a hard surface because you are snipping only a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So it's nice to be able to glide the bottom side of your snips along the table, and then it will allow you to make easier snips and move faster through the process. On the face, I make sure that all of my snips are about a 1/4 inch apart from each other. And then when I move on to the body, I'm not as concerned, so those snips are between a 1/2 inch to a 1/4 inch apart from each other. Now this seam here where the eye patch is actually your thickest seam on your entire project. There are actually 10 layers here because you've got your 3 from the ear, your 3 from the face, then you've got the 2 from the eye patch and the 2 from the inner ear. So do this in layers. Do not try to snip through all of those layers at the same time. So I'll just choose a little section and I'll go along and I'll make those snips, and then I'll choose the next section, go along, make more snips. They do not have to line up. Everything will rag up beautifully in the end, so don't stress too much about it. And then on the main body, you will have all of those seams that you sewed open. So you can go alongside all of those seams and just clip them free. And then you can clip along all of those edges once again between that 1/4 to a 1/2 inch space all the way along your ragged or raw edges, I should say. The raw edges that will turn into the ragged edges. And then do the same thing around the entire outer edge, of course, making sure not to snip across any of your seams.
So I have an old video tutorial that walks you through all of the steps that I do to wash my animal rag quilt. But I have a few extra steps that I want to throw on in here. And if you want to see the whole tutorial, linked in the description down below. So something that I don't mention in that tutorial is that you should use color catchers. Now, I don't recommend using color catchers for all of your rag quilts. Like this one, the puppy dog and the kitty cat, they're quite light fabrics. So using color catchers I didn't find weren't necessary for those 2 rag quilts. However, for this kitty cat and for this puppy dog, the colors are so much stronger and vibrant, and to be honest, I bought them at a cheaper fabric store, so I wasn't so sure if they were of the highest quality. So I used color catchers for them, and believe me, my color catchers caught a ton of purple color in the wash. So use those. Definitely follow all the rest of my instructions. I do like to now wash. I do 2 rounds of washing, but I like to do both rounds in cold. Second round is with soap. And then when I throw it in the dryer, I'll throw it on like a medium heat setting. If you are worried about all of the fibers ending up in your washing machine and in your dryer, check out that video tutorial. I'll give you some tips there. However, something I do want to mention, which I find is awesome about these rag quilts and something that I did not plan, but was a very happy accident, is that there's actually not a ton of seams. So you're not snipping a ton of seams, so you're saving your hand some extra energy there. And then in the wash, you're actually not losing as many fibers as you might think that you lose. So in older animal rag quilts that I have made that were not my pattern, there was definitely a ton of fibers that I had to deal with. But I was very pleasantly surprised that with this pattern that I have written up, it actually didn't have a massive amount of fibers to deal with. So I really do think you can do this in your home washing machine and dryer. Okay, that was a very long little side note. Sorry.
And this is what your rag quilt will look like when it has finished the drying process. Now I'm just snipping away some of the longer little strands that have come especially off of those whiskers. And if I am gifting this to somebody, I will try to de-pill it a little bit. However, flannel does pill. That's just the nature of the fabric, so I don't worry about that too much. But I know that some people, if they are gifting this item, they want it to look nice, new, and fresh. So I have two methods for de-pilling a rag quilt. The first is to just buy some cheap razors from the dollar store and just go over your rag quilt with those. I find that it will pick up a lot of the pilling that has happened on your rag quilt. And the second is this awesome little de-pilling machine. I use it all the time. I love that I can just charge it up, that it has 3 different speeds. It even comes with an extra little blade to replace once the first blade maybe gets dull. I have not come across that problem yet. And then it has this little port or drawer, whatever you want to call it, where all of the extra fuzz will end up that you can just empty out once you start feeling it getting full. And you are good to go.
Can you see the puppy and the kitty? Not really, hey? All right, you guys, we are done making our puppy dog rag quilt and our kitty cat rag quilt. I hope that you guys love this pattern as much as I love it. It took me forever to make it as perfect as I feel that it is. Please let me know in the comments down below what other animals you might want me to make in the future, because I have got some ideas brewing, but I would love to hear your advice as well. I hope that you guys are having a wonderful day, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.